building has only just been granted final permissions. That's the current state of play.
All right, Minister, thank you very much for that. I suspect we'll hear a great deal more about it in the future. Thank you for being here, Minister O'Donnell, and all the members for raising the various matters. We move now to a very important report by the Committee on Agriculture and Food, and a motion regarding the report entitled Environmental Impact of Local Industrial Emissions in Castlecomer, County Kilkenny. Now, have we a Minister coming to deal with this matter? I call on Deputy Jackie Cahill. Here comes the Joint Committee to move the motion. Deputy, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you, Cahill. And as Chairman of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Agriculture, Food and Marine, I'm glad to bring this report in front of the Dáil this evening for discussion. First of all, I want to give apologies for Deputy John McGuinness, who is unavoidably absent. And I'd like to welcome in the gallery Dan Brennan, the farmer in question, and his friends and neighbours. And I suppose in particular to show how serious this issue has been taken by the agricultural community, the President of the IFA, Florida Garment, and the President of ICMSA, Dennis Brennan, are in the gallery as well to show solidarity with Dan Brennan. I suppose we did this report at the back end of last year. And our view was that we would like to have done an independent investigation, the committee into it. And the legal representatives of the House said that was beyond the remit of the committee. And I suppose what I see, Minister, this evening here, and thank you for taking the time to be here to discuss this report with us. What I want to take from this committee, from this here this evening is, I'm earnestly requesting that an independent investigation happen into what happened on Dan Brennan's farm. And I suppose, Minister, a point I want to make at the start is this most definitely wasn't on your watch. It happened a number of years ago. I suppose we were talking historically about, something that happened, 20 years ago on the farm of Dan Brennan in Castlecomer. But there is an awful lot of unanswered questions. And one thing is certain, that Dan Brennan has suffered huge mental anguish and financial hardship about what happened on his farm. And I suppose I want to raise a number of issues here this evening, Minister, that I think will prove conclusively that an independent investigation into what the incidents on Dan Brennan's farm and what happened there needs to happen. First of all, I want to quote from 3 letters from VITs that worked in the department. And the first is a Dolan on the 15th of October 2004, who had spent 2 years on Dan Brennan's farm. And he just quote directly from the letter that he wrote, "It has been confirmed that there is a very severe problem of ill-thrift and stunting on this farm. No infectious cause of the problem has been identified to date." Second, Pat Kelleher, head of the lab in Kilkenny, Department Lab in Kilkenny, on the 26th of October 2004. "Mr. Brennan's farm is close to an EBA licensed facility. The circumstances in which Mr. Brennan finds himself are outside his control and could not have been foreseen." And the third is a letter from John Moriarty on the 24th of May 2005. "This farm is now the subject of an interagency investigation consisting of the Department, the EPA, Tagus, Health Board and County Council, in accordance with specific guidelines of the protocol for the investigation approach to serious animal-human health problems. The activation by the state of this protocol is only made in very exceptional cases. We have carried out extensive testing, analysis and feed trials, but have not yet identified the cause of or a possible solution to the problem. The circumstances in which Mr. Brennan finds himself are outside his control and could not have been foreseen. Mr. Brennan has implemented all recommendations given to him by both the laboratory and Tagus. Mr. Brennan has been extremely cooperative throughout this investigation and has invested huge time and financial resources in assisting us with this investigation. However, the problem still continues. And I suppose, you know, the full copy, I have the full copies of those letters if the Minister wants them. But there were 3 department vets who stated clearly that there was an issue that they couldn't comprehend happening on Dan Brennan's farm. Why did the department allow the lab to publish a report saying that it was Dan Brennan's disease manager that was a problem on his farm? Michael Sheridan, the Deputy Chief Veterinary Inspector, was one of 15 people present at a meeting in the New Park Hotel in June 2006. Also present were representatives of Tagus, Kilkenny Regional Veterinary Laboratory, UCD Vet College, the EPA, Kilkenny County Council, Dan Brennan's Vets, Limerick University and a scientist from North Carolina. UCD Vet College had done an epidemiology report on the farm and they told the lab in Kilkenny and Michael Sheridan it was not disease, and the Vet College proved this later when they took over the farm by blood testing every 2 weeks for a period of 2 years, and there was no disease found. So I think again, Minister, that's an extremely important point, that for the Veterinary College did extensive blood testing on the animals on Dan Brennan's farm and no disease was found with that testing. Why did the department ignore Tom Slevin when he told him our cattle had bones growing in their soft tissue, their vertebrae could be cut with a knife? He had never seen this before in his 45 years as a vet. 11 of the 40 cattle that died early on in that investigation and were post-mortemed. And I think there's a number of important points to be made here about the post-mortems. To me, you know, tissue, that bones were soft and that bones were going out of the tissue of the animals. Like, you know, that is, to say that is unusual, you know, it would be very much understating the mark. And, you know, it was agreed that a pathologist from the UK would come, and I think there was 2 names given to the department at the time that independent post-mortems would be done. That never happened. And, you know, for animals to have bones growing out of their kidneys, it's something extraordinary, unusual, and there had to be some extraordinary reason for that to be happening. And I think that point alone, in my view, merits an investigation as to why there wasn't independent post-mortems done. And, you know, the results of those post-mortems have never, ever been explained, how animals, you know, could have such internal issues happening to them. Tagus Kilkenny wrote to the EPA saying that there was something really seriously wrong on Dan Brennan's farm in January 2003. And they stated that the management of the farm was not the problem. They said that the EPA said this was something they had never seen before. Jack Gardner, who was the Dean of UCD, was commissioned to do a study. And he concluded that 45 acres on the farm were affected by pollution, that the trees, the ditches, etc. were being affected by pollution. And in his view, it was caused by fluoride. And again, and I think, you know, this is an extremely serious point again, Minister. This case was taken to Brussels. And, you know, I watched the videos of the hearings in Brussels. And the video in 2012 shows Marianne McGuinness, who was an MEP at the time, at the Joint Research Committee, that stated that the Joint Research Committee would look at this. The Department of Agriculture and the EPA were there. Dan Brennan got a phone call in July that year from a person on the committee stating that there was political interference in his case and that this would not progress any further. And that was the end of what happened in Brussels. And I want to read an extract from a letter that was sent to yourself, Minister, and I got a copy of it as well, from a retired circuit court judge. And I'm just reading an extracted letter, and obviously you have a full copy of the letter, but I want to read it into the DAR record. Another area of political concern is this. The issues in question were before a parliamentary committee of the European Parliament in the years 2010, 2011 and 2012. On the last occasion, the recording confirms that the matter was adjourned for further investigation and was due to be revisited by the committee upon the conclusion of such investigation. What followed is something which ought to cause a great deal of concern to those and particularly parliamentarians who uphold proper standards and procedures in our democratic institutions. The case never came back before the committee, and the investigation in question appears to have never taken place. Instead, the file was sent to Ireland, apparently for consideration by a parliamentary committee in this jurisdiction. There was, however, not so much as a covering note in this regard. What's even more troubling is that this decision was not made by the European Committee sitting in either open or closed session. Rather, it appears to be decided upon by the committee's secretariat. The strong suspicion of political interference is inescapable. It is worth noting that the effect of this transfer was the investigation by the state on inter alia two organs of Irish state, your department and the EPA. Thereafter, it took a full decade before the matter came to be considered at municipal level, and then only after extremely dogged persistence on the part of Dan Brennan and his advisers, without which, undoubtedly, it would never have seen the light of day. Of even greater concern is the fact that Dan Brennan has been denied access to this file in all the years since arrived in this country. On what basis can such refusal be justified? If there ever such a basis has never been communicated to Dan Brennan or his advisers or his supporters, and we're interested to hear how this can be justified when we next speak on this matter in the Dáil. That's a letter from a retired Circuit Court judge, and I know, Minister, you have a copy of it. And how a case can go to Brussels like that and not have a conclusion to its hearing is extremely hard to explain. Tagus in Moore Park in September 2004 told the department it was cardamom poisoning that was affecting the cattle on Dan Brennan's farm, and that had even found it in the chutes on the cattle sheds. The department didn't test for cadmium when they were getting the vet college to do the testing, when the vet college took over the investigation for the Department of Agriculture. Jim Creddy, who was the vet for Tagus Moore Park, rang the vet college to test for cadmium, and it was then that it showed up in the bloods of the cattle on Dan Brennan's farm. In December 2008, the vet college told Dan Brennan, Tom Sneville and Michael Lamb that it was cadmium poisoning, and his cattle had 95% of the symptoms. They told us the report would be out in 2009. They told Dan and his vets it would be 10 to 12 years before you notice any major improvement. They told him not to get out of cows as they have a level of tolerance built up to the pollution. And I suppose, to be remiss of me this evening here not to remember Pádraig Walsh as well, the former president of the IFA, who put a huge amount of work into pressing Dan's case. I meant to mention him at the start. When the vet college found high cadmium levels in the bloods of Dan Brennan's cattle, they wrote to the EPA to know how much cadmium per hour was coming out of the factory. The EPA told him it was 1 gram per hour, but in actual fact, the reading was 1,000 times higher. It was 1 kilogram. Why then did no alarm bells go off in the EPA when the test in 2004 showed almond brick were emanating 88 times the German guidelines of cadmium? Why was there no record of any more cadmium testing done after this stage, especially after Moore Park telling the department that there was cadmium poisoning the cattle had? Tagus found when the trials were being done on the farm, the cattle were eating 12.5% over normal, and despite this, they were losing weight. Sick or diseased cattle don't eat. And there was extensive trials done on the farm, where cattle from a neighbouring farm were brought in, fodder from a neighbouring farm was brought in, cattle from Dan Brennan's farm were taken away to an outside farm to be fed. And all clearly showed that once animals were on Dan Brennan's farm, they didn't thrive and suffered serious ill thrive. Why did the department ignore Michael Lamb's, Dan Brennan's vet, when he told him there was a toxic agent at work? He had ruled out all other causes on the farm in 2002. Minister, why did the department ignore the vet college in April 2004 when they told them the farm needed to be looked at from a helicopter view, that something in the area was affecting the farm? And again, and I suppose this is cutting very close to the bone for a lot of people in the Castlecomer area. But in 2007, the parish priest in Castlecomer said in public at a funeral, "This is the 8th worker I have buried from Ormond Brick in the last 12 years. And there were others buried in other parishes that I did not celebrate their funeral mass. The priest said off at the altar at a funeral mass, will someone please do something about this?" The department rang Dan in October 9 and told him a little glitch had happened. The cadonium found in the samples over a 6-month period had accidentally been put in the lab and did not come out of the factory. How could this happen in an EPA accredited lab? Like, the fact that samples were taken, and I'd have to say that it looks like they didn't want to test the samples that they took from Dan Brennan's farm, and they waited until the results would not be accurate. There's a strong correlation between increasing cadmium levels in the body of the animals and weight loss in the animals. Furthermore, isophilia of the blood occurred at levels of 11.5%. Scientific data confirming these links proves exposure of Dan's animals to toxic levels of cadmium. Minister, I raised a huge amount of questions there in what I've been saying, and there's other points I can raise. But what I'm asking is, and I'm asking it most earnestly, as chairman of the Joint Directors Committee on Agriculture, Food and the Marine, that you would have an independent investigation into what happened. And let's get answers to the questions. And I have another 9 or 10 on the list in front of me. Questions that need to be asked on behalf of Dan Brennan, and answers need to be given to him. And I have met Dan Brennan on a lot of occasions over the last number of years, and I find him a most genuine man. And all he wants is answers to the questions that he's asking, and justification that the losses that were incurred in his farm and the losses that were incurred, what was happening to his cattle, was outside of his control, and it had nothing got to do with the farming practices practiced by Dan Brennan and his family.
Thank you, Deputy.
Thank you very much, Deputy Cahill, and thanks to yourself and your committee for your work in relation to this, and for commissioning this report on the environmental impact of local industrial emissions in Castlecomer, County Kilkenny, which you completed last year. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Dan Brennan and his colleagues and the farm representatives and the 2 farm presidents, Francie Gorman and Dennis Drennan here today as well, and other representatives and supporters. I know, Cahirlock, your report deals with the issues that Mr Brennan and his advisers have raised with regards to the environmental impact allegedly caused by industrial emissions from a brick factory, and I know your committee has put very significant work and time into it, and held a number of meetings in relation to assessing it as well. I know the clear ask from all of you collectively is that there's a further review and assessment of what happened. I undertook, whenever we discussed this most recently in relation to a topical issue, to assess the matter further. Also requested if there's any additional further information. Obviously, with the passage of time, there isn't any new information, but I know there's a lot of there's significant assessments having been done previously, and while I don't see any basis as such from my own assessments of it, I think in an acknowledgement of the work that your committee have done and the questions that you're raising, I think it's appropriate that I would have a separate and independent review of my own department's investigation and any information that fed into that as well, to look at this further and to feed back and look at what has been done here. Obviously, as 20 years is a long time, and there's a lot of water under the bridge in relation to it. But I do respect the work of the committee and the priority and time which you've collectively given to this issue, and the assessment that you've made, and I think it's fair in recognition of that I would asked somebody independent to review the department's work in relation to and investigation in relation to this, and also any information alongside that too. I think it's important also just today as well, Cahir, to recount the work that has been carried out by a number of state agencies since these events occurred some 20 years or more ago. In 2003, the problems reported in Mr. Brennan's herd were initially investigated by the Regional Veterinary Laboratory in Kilkenny, and because of the severity and the intractable nature, Cahir, of the problem experienced on the farm, a legitimate question was raised about the possibility of environmental pollution playing a role in Mr. Brennan's farming difficulties. Having looked at all of the options and given the gravity of the situation, an interagency group was convened in line with the protocol for the investigative approach to serious animal and human health issues. The substantial resources required to convene an interagency group meant that this decision wasn't taken lightly. The decision to do so reflected the serious consideration given to Mr. Brennan's farm, the possible risks to the environment, and the potential human health concerns that were also raised at that time. The interagency group comprised relevant and expert bodies of the state with competence to assess on a scientific and objective basis whether or not environmental pollution could have a role to play in the farm's difficulties. The group was not in any way dismissive of the possibility that environmental pollution was a factor in the issues on the farm. Indeed, the opposite was the case, because the group was expressly established to explore that possibility. The group comprised the experts from the department's veterinary laboratories, Chugusk, the South Eastern Health Board, as it then was, and Kilkenny County Council. And the Environmental Protection Agency, as the body with specific expertise and responsibility for monitoring the control of environmental pollution, was also a member of the group. This joint and combined scientific investigation into Mr. Brennan's difficulties and the wider environment was impartial, detailed and substantial. The Veterinary Laboratories report in June 2006 details the comprehensive field and laboratory investigations undertaken on the farm. In tandem with the investigation, and during the latter part of 2005, my department funded a comprehensive animal health programme on the farm. On the foot of this, you understand that animal health and production on the farm had shown a definite improvement from the first 5 months of 2006. Subsequently, and on foot of a request by Mr. Brennan and his advisors, University College Dublin's Centre of Veterinary Epidemiology and Risk Analysis, or CVERA, was commissioned to conduct further epidemiological studies on the farm. The CVERA report was completed in August 2009. Chugusk carried out animal production investigations, which included animal feeding and nutrition trials in 2003, between 2003 and 2005, and trace element analysis in 2004, and soil and herbage investigations in 2007 in support of the additional investigations of CVERA and the EPA. Substantial and in-depth investigations were conducted by the EPA into the following matters. Firstly, fluoride emissions analysed by University College Cork. Also, tree survey conducted by UCD School of Agriculture. An Environmental Protection Agency reports on licence parameters and compliance monitoring. Also, continuous emissions monitoring system outputs, as well as dispersion modelling of cadmium emissions. And two, production records in relation to material safety data sheets, and also grass and soil analysis. And finally, independent peer review of the work of the operations of the brick factory by US and UK environmental experts. The HSE reviewed human health parameters as part of the interagency group investigations. This involved an examination of any unusual patterns of human illness in the area. Kilkenny County Council carried out assessments of the farm, or of the water in the farm. The interagency report of 2010 has regard to all of the reports by the different agencies involved. On the basis of scientific evaluation of these investigations, the interagency group issued its conclusions in its final report of August 2010. I understand that at all stages Mr. Brennan was kept apprised of ongoing studies and received the reports as they were completed. Mr. Brennan and his advisors were also provided with opportunities to raise any concerns that they may have had about the ongoing investigations. I'm also advised that Mr. Brennan also sought a meeting with the authors of the 2009 CVERA report before the final draft was completed, and on both occasions Mr. Brennan was given the opportunity to correct any factual errors or omissions in these reports. final interagency report in 2010 specifically concluded that there was no evidence of environmental pollution, cadmium or fluoride impact on the health of animals on Mr Brennan's farm. These conclusions were based on wide-ranging chemical and pathological analysis of blood and tissues of animals from the farm and from extensive environmental analysis. I wish to acknowledge again, Cathaoirleach, the report of your joint committee and your members' committee, and specifically note as well that your committee disagree with some of the conclusions of the interagency report. However, it is evident that at the time the effort by the state to get to the bottom of the matter was significant. The agencies involved were there to serve the public interest, and I don't have any reason to believe that their efforts were intended to do anything other than to establish the facts in relation to this matter. Notwithstanding the significant scientific work carried out by the 5 agencies as part of the interagency group, which concluded with findings in the interagency report of 2010, I do appreciate very much the human element of this and acknowledge the stress experienced by Mr Brennan and his family by the health issues in his herd, which undoubtedly have been very difficult. So in recognition of that and of the work of your committee, Cathaoirleach, and the ask of your committee, I will move now to seek an independent review of my department's investigation into this, and also the reports that would have fed into that as well, and to report back to me. So thanks again to the work of your committee in terms of giving time and attention, looking into this, and for coming forward with your final report and bringing it before the Dáil here. And again, I acknowledge the presence of Dan Brennan here today, and many of his supporters and colleagues as well. Indeed, Minister Noonan here as well. So,
Thank you, Minister. I now call on Deputy Matt Carthy, who has, they tell me here, 8 minutes.
Thank you, and thank the Minister for being here, and again to warmly welcome Dan Brennan and his family and friends and representatives of the farm organisation. So there are some facts in dispute, but this is what we know for a fact. The Brennan family ran a very successful farm that was considered to be top-notch by anybody who had ever seen it. And then problems began to emerge, and they began to emerge as in consequence or in correlation to activities taking place on a nearby factory. Animals got sick, milk yield dramatically reduced, biodiversity was destroyed, plant life was wiped out. And as the output of the adjoining factory intensified, the problems got intensively worse. And when the Brennan family complained, raised issues, raised concerns, they were told to varying degrees that either it was their fault, in one instance as it was described to them, or that this pertained to disease, not pollution. But we also know for a fact that when animals were taken from Dan Brennan's farms, animals that were severely underweight and severely under-yielding, when they were taken to a separate setting, that their health improved dramatically. And we know that throughout this time, when all of these issues were prevailing, that it was Dan Brennan and his family that were actually striving for answers. That is not the action of a deficient farmer. That is not the action of somebody who's responsible. That is the action of somebody who is desperately trying to find answers as to what is happening on their farm. Throughout that time, farm organisations, independent experts, academics, farm advisors, in fact, from my reading of the facts, every objective person that analysed this found that Dan Brennan was an excellent farmer. Indeed, farm leaders, as was mentioned by Deputy Cahill, and farm journalists actually state their own credibility by actually defending Dan Brennan as a farmer and arguing for answers. The department, though, for some reason, refused essentially to accept all of those facts, and we know that all the reports and the works by various agencies, as described by the Minister, have been considered deficient by all of those people who, it must be said, the Joint Committee on Agriculture and Food and the Marine consider to be experts when evidence is being sought. And then in December 2008, we know for a fact that the brick factory closed, and then overnight, literally, farm conditions immediately began to improve, to such a point that within a relatively short point of time, the farm again became an absolute model in terms of best practice. And throughout the time since, Dan Brennan has fought like hell for the truth. And I wasn't aware for much of that time just the efforts that he had gone to and those who were advocating from him. And the first that I became aware of this case was in November 2022, when Dan Brennan and other people associated with this case came before the Joint Committee. And I have to say, I have never been as struck by evidence that was put before the committee, and I was very pleased that the committee decided to bring forward this report. So since that, we brought forward the report. Initially, the response by the department was to dismiss it entirely. In December, the month after this report was commissioned, Deputy Kathleen Function, now a member of the European Parliament, raised by way of oral question a request that these issues would be independently investigated. The Minister refused. In November 2023, there was a topical issue where Deputy Cahill brought myself and Deputy Fitzmaurice and Deputy John McGuinness together to raise questions and to call for an independent examination of all of those things, and that was refused, and it has been in subsequent topical issues since. So today the Minister has committed to ensure that there is an independent review of all of these circumstances, and I have to say I absolutely welcome that. And my appeal to you, Minister, is don't take the goodness out of it. You've made an important step, I believe, forward today. What I would ask you to do is to sit down with Dan Brennan and the leaders of the IFA and the ICMSA and agree how that independent review will actually take place and how it will operate and function. This cannot, and this is no disrespect to any of your officials or anyone in the department, but it is clear from the evidence that we have heard that the department hasn't been up to the standard that we would expect in terms of getting answers. So my appeal to you is to do that. Sit around a table with those people and agree at terms of reference and exactly how this will be, and allow us to get to the point where we actually get to the truth. Because it just struck me when I was talking to a young person in my office in advance of this, and I was trying to explain, as you try to explain in a short period of time, the complexities of these issues. But they had retorted to me, imagine if you had a situation where a farmer was accused of actually causing widespread destruction to wildlife and plant life for a long number of years, and any time an examination came about, they said, oh no, it's not the farmer's fault at all, and then all of a sudden the farm just stopped operating and the problems solved themselves like that. We wouldn't all just be allowed to pretend that it never happened. This House would be in absolute uproar trying to get answers to it. The same should be the case, despite the fact that the factory in this instance closed down in 2008, and whatever has happened, anybody who has spent more than 30 seconds with Dan Brennan knows the pain, the hurt and the anger that any farmer will feel if they're told that they're a bad farmer or that they are somehow responsible for what happened on this particular farm. So we should be just equally as adamant that the truth must come out. And as I say, I welcome the Minister's statement, particularly the point that he has said. I think the language he has used is that he will seek an independent review, ensure that it is a truly independent review, and ensure that the terms and the operations of that review are agreed beforehand, so that we can all have confidence that at the end of the day we might finally get a step closer to the truth.
Thank you, Deputy. Now call Deputy Marion Harkin, who has 8 minutes.
Thank you, Lieutenant Corla. I may not take all of the 8 minutes, but I'm here because I know who Dan Brennan is and I know him for a long time. I'm not a member of the Agriculture Committee, and I want to congratulate its Chair, Deputy Cahill, and the various members of the committee for their untiring and unceasing work on this. It gives me great faith actually, in your committee and in the workings of this House, that we can get to this point. And the Minister's response today, I'll come back to that in a moment. But the reason I know Dan Brennan is I got to know him as a member of the European Parliament. He's not even in the constituency I represented. But when he came to see me and he laid his case out, I, like all of you, were immediately struck by the fact that this was a case that had to be heard, that the evidence that I could see, the reports, etc., that were placed in front of me were such that it would have been egregious not to have his case heard and for him and his family to find some kind of justice. And I also want to mention the farming organisations and to welcome Francie Gorman and Dennis Brennan here today, because they have stood shoulder to shoulder with him. And last can, when you see TDs from all sides of the House and you see farm organisations, their leaders, down through the years standing with Dan Brennan, you know that this is a substantial case. This is not just an issue that can be brushed under the carpet. But to come back to what happened at the European level, I mean, I was a member of the Petitions Committee. I was there when Dan came on a number of occasions. I met him. I have no memory of any public discussion on this file being sent back to Dublin. There was certainly no agreement about that. And I'd like to know, and it's crazy that as a member of that committee, I'm standing up in this House asking, what happened to that file? Where did it go? Who sent it? Who was it sent to? Is it still there? I mean, those questions, somebody needs to answer them. The answer may be, I don't know. But at least we need to get an answer. And in order to get an answer, somebody needs to see what happened. Now, the relevance of that, I just can't say, because I don't know what's in the file. But certainly the relevance of all of the detail that you went through here today, Deputy Cahill, that is unquestioned. All the different letters from 3 vets, from the veterinary college, saying there were no diseases, but yet a department report says that it was probably down to some kind of infectious disease. I wonder, was that infectious disease ever established? Did they actually say what it was? Or did they just say it probably is? Because we don't know what it is. There was no independent pathologist brought in to do the postmortems. Why did that happen again? And the letters and the words from, as I said, so many different vets and the veterinary college were just ignored. And again, Deputy Cahill, you raised the issue of the EPA lab and the glitch, whatever that is, that happened there. The sample, how did it happen? Why did it happen? All the evidence, and I have believed this from really the very first time I met Dan Brennan, but my belief has got stronger over the years that there is something really wrong here. And I've never stood up in this House and said that about anything else. And as I said, he's the other side of the country from me, but there's something really wrong here. And Minister, in the last debate, you said, that was last November, that you had read all the reports and you were satisfied there were no unanswered questions. I'm just wondering if that's still the case. You did say that there's no new information as such, but I think we'll all have to agree that there are very significant disputes and discrepancies between what the department says and what other experts say. There might be nothing new, because in a way, how could you expect to have anything new so many years after the event, if you like, or events concluded? What we need to look at are the differences, the discrepancies, what happened, and what the department says and what other experts say. And as Deputy Carty said, one thing we know for sure, because all of those who know him, all of those in the farming organisations say that he was a model farmer, he and his family. And certainly the timing of what happened cannot be disputed. That doesn't mean there was definitely a relationship, but it's very strong evidence to investigate that relationship between the opening and closing of the factory and the ill health of Dan Brennan's herd. But look, Minister, today, from what I heard, you saying that there will be a review. And I just took down what you said, that you would review the department's work in relation to this and also information alongside that too. I think I have that accurately. So and I welcome that, Minister. But what I want to say is it's absolutely crucial that the terms of review or investigation are extensive enough to take all available evidence into consideration. Not just the work of the department, but all of the letters, reports, information from vets, the Vet College, Teagasc, EPA, all of those who are involved in this case. And as I said, if relevant, that infamous file that somehow seems to have made its way from Brussels to Dublin and then disappeared. You have taken the first step, and thank you for that. I'm glad to see it. It's late, but you're the Minister now, and you're doing the right thing. And you can be assured of that, Minister. But just to make sure the terms of reference are extensive enough, and secondly, that whatever person heads up this investigation needs to be independent and needs to be seen to be independent. That's easy for you to do, and whether it might be a retired judge or somebody who, as I said, is seen to be independent, because this has dragged on for too long and it does need to be dealt with. So thank you for what you said today, and we look forward to hearing how this will progress. And as I said, once again, thanks to the Agriculture Committee. This is good work, and I hope it ends well. And to Dan Brennan for his tenacity and his courage. It's just incredible. But I suppose this is his life's work, his family farm, and he wants to see that justice is done, that every piece of information is taken into consideration, and that we get an independent review. And we all, I think, can say we look forward to that. Thank you, Lesca.
Thank you, Deputy Michael has 4 minutes. The Minister for Ministry.
What?
4 minutes, tell me here.
Yes. Gurmagut, Lesca and Corda. And the first thing I want to say, I want to commend Jackie Cahill. He's the chair of our committee, but he has stuck his teeth into this. And this, as Marion has said, Matt is from Monaghan. I'm from Roscommon Galway. Dan Brennan isn't in our area. Jackie is from Tipperary. But when we heard that man, when we saw that man within a committee, we knew that somebody doesn't keep something going. Go back to 2004, 20 years ago. They don't keep something going unless they feel there's a woeful injustice done to them. And I want to commend the farmer organisations and welcome Dennis Drennan and Francie here as well. And I also want to remember Pádraig Walsh was within, God rest him, the day that Dan was in with us in the committee. I want to think of him. But this isn't just about Dan Brennan. This could be a farmer in Donegal, in Kerry, in Sligo, in Tipperary or somewhere else. And I don't care what department said what down through the years. This stinks to me from the high heavens, to be quite frank about it. And I'm no private investigator or I'm no scientist. But when you check fodder, when you check water, when you see that a farmer, and it's insulting to a farmer to be told that they're not looking after their cattle properly when they're doing it. And when you check all these things, and the farmer isn't at fault, then, as Marion said, you have to have a helicopter view and look outside and see what's wrong. And in my opinion, you know, there was a guy in that day, and I think it's Mr. Kelly, is that right, that was in that day. And, you know, there was samples taken on Eve gutters. There was a very, you know, that guy talked from the heart. And huge research done. And it wasn't being listened to. And something stinks when something goes over to Brussels, but comes back without a person on the committee knowing about it, without it being discussed. Well, what are we doing with this? Are we going to have a report on it? How did it come back? Something is wrong when, you know, you talk about 1 gram and 1 kilogram of catechol. There is something amiss. There is something awful wrong and suspicious when samples go to a place but they don't appear, or they get lost. God, it's very convenient, because that shouldn't happen. There is something very wrong if a vet is moved that had an opinion. Very, very wrong. And in fairness, Minister, it wasn't in your time. There's no one saying one thing to you because you weren't there. You weren't the minister of that given time. But we as politicians, no more than in other inquiries that has been brought up in the Dáil, it is our responsibility to try and undo a wrong in our view that has happened. It is our responsibility that a person, a farmer, a family person, and a person that has gone through, you could see it etched in Dan Brennan's face at that committee. I never knew the man from Adam, neither did Matt. Jackie might have known him. We never knew him from Adam, but you could see it etched in that man's face, the years of torture that he and his family would have gone through in trying to get justice. And I welcome what you have said here, Minister, today, that you're saying that there'll be an inquiry. But I would say to you, I listened to the words of an inquiry, a review of what the department has done, and I heard you saying there was no new information. In my opinion, an independent person, not nominated by the department, I think you should go out or ask Jackie or someone to get that independent person and put whatever expertise. I would actually personally, like some retired High Court judge, might know a lot about farming, but give them the wherewithal to be given the expertise from outside the country. Because the biggest problem, if we're investigating ourselves, we're not too fond of hanging ourselves. And the EPA, in my opinion, has a lot to answer here. There are certain state or semi-state bodies has a fair bit to answer for. Because in my opinion, one farm was sacrificed for a bigger picture. And I would ask you, Minister, to do that, to make sure that we get closure on this. We're not here today of a Thursday afternoon for the crack. We're here to try and make sure there's justice got. And as I say, I welcome, in fairness, you have made this effort. And I welcome that. But please put the wherewithal of the expertise, and if that needs to come from be it Germany or be it the UK or wherever, because no more than a lot of things in this country, it's a small circle. And what needs to be done is not alone of the review of the department, but a review of every person that gave evidence or if there's more evidence that can be brought forward, the likes of that Crilly guy, and to go to like UCD, to go to all the places and look for the answers, as well as going to Brussels and finding out what went on behind the scenes, that a report was posted back, but no one seemed to know who done it. Now, something is very fishy about that. And, you know, I can go through all the different parts of it. In fairness, Jackie has outlined the case. We have heard it, that basically bones start growing in kidneys. Like, there's something wrong. It doesn't happen. How many farmers around the country today has that happening? 0. There is something wrong that has caused that. And in my opinion, it wasn't that man up on top there, his fault.
Where are you going? You going out?
And I there's no point in me going through every tittle-tattle of what went on. That's what the person that's going to be heading this up needs to do. And they need to meticulously go through this and give an open mind, but get the expertise around and listen to all the players in this, including the ordinary people, which is very important. But I welcome what you have done, Minister. I thank you for what you have done. But the one thing that needs to be done is that this doesn't drag on for a year and we're scratching our heads again. This needs to be done as soon as possible. Yes, whatever time is required to do it meticulously, but not to kick the ball that far down the road that we're waiting and waiting again. Kuramila Mahagat.
Deputy, I now call on Mr. Malcolm Noonan, who has 4 minutes.
I won't take up too much time, Carlock. Again, I just want to welcome Dan Brennan, Francie Gorman and Dennis Drennan and representatives of the farm organisations, and I'm sure Dan's family watching at home as well. This is an important day for Dan and his family. I know Dan, he's a responsible farmer, a good farmer, and I visited that farm, I think, with Mary White and John Gormley at the depths of that crisis and saw firsthand what was going on there, and there was something seriously untoward and seriously wrong. And I know Dan to be a good farmer, and I know that this is as much about pride and about vindication of his practices as a farmer. And I think that I welcome, first of all, the work done by Deputy Jackie Cahill and the Agricultural Committee. I sat in and watched that session, and again listened again to harrowing evidence, you know, from Dan, and to have to relive that again, I think must have been very difficult on him and his family. But I think the committee did a good job in taking on board that evidence. But I think today, more importantly, I think the commitment that my colleague, Minister McConlogue, has given is an important one, and I really welcome that. I welcome the fact that he is committed now to an independent review of this really very just awful case. And I think, like other deputies have said, I think it needs to be an expansive review. It needs to look at all the scientific evidence and take into account everything. So the terms of reference of the review are going to be very important. But I think for today, I think this is an important day and a good day for Dan on a very long and arduous journey for him and his family to clear and to vindicate what they had known all along, which was something very amiss that wasn't of their making. Gord Margaret.
Anish, Minister.
Thanks, Cahir. Look, and listen, just thanks, Minister Noonan, and thanks again to Chairman Deputy Cahill and all of the members for the report and their work into this. And again, acknowledge the presence of Dan Brennan and family members and farm representatives and supporters here today as well. As I laid out in my contribution at the outset, there has been significant investigation and assessment of this over the years by many state agencies, as we've discussed, from indeed in terms of the interagency group that was set up, including, for example, the Department's Veterinary Laboratories, Chugus, the South Eastern Health Board, as it was, Kilkenny County Council and the EPA, and also then the CVERA, the UCD's Centre for Veterinary and Epidemiological and Risk Analysis. So there's a long back record here in terms of the assessments that would have been done and indeed assessing what would have happened. But I have said and acknowledge the work the committee have done, and while my department are clear that the process was followed and assessments were taken and looked into with all due regard, I accept the request for an independent review and assessment of that, and certainly I'll carefully consider now the next steps in relation to that. And listen, just to thank again the work that the Parliament and the Committee of the Parliament have taken in relation to investing significant time of the Oireachtas and on a cross-party basis into assessing this issue, something I respect and something I will now assess further in terms of this step that I'm taking. Cormago to Kerala.
Now I call on Deputy Jackie Cal, mover of the motion, to reply.
Yeah, thank you very much, Cahill. And I just want to sincerely thank the Minister for taking on board the request from the Joint Oireachtas Committee that I'm privileged to chair. And I really appreciate the Minister taking it on board. And, our report entitled The Environmental Impact of Local Industrial Emissions in Castlecomer. And I welcome the fact that we're going to have a review of what happened there. And I'm not going to go back over what I've said earlier in this debate, but I very much welcome the Minister's decision, and hopefully we can bring this to a conclusion. And as Deputy Fitzmaurice said, sooner rather than later, but as long as we do it comprehensively and in an efficient manner. That's what I and everyone that's involved in this wants. And I really sincerely thank the Minister for his presence here this evening and for his listening to the committee and their concerns. And we just want to get to the truth of the matter and bring it, as I said, to a conclusion with an independent investigation as quickly and as speedily and efficiently as possible. Thank you again, Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. I now must put the question. And the question is that the motion be agreed to. Is the motion agreed? Motion agreed. And that is motion is the motion is agreed. So that's the end of that. On the Anish Tawandar go G Dotlug on March Shahogan.